I never imagined I would be the kind of man who ended up here, sitting alone at my desk late at night, typing words I wish I never had to think, much less write. If someone had asked me a year ago what my life looked like, I would have said something like, normal, good, stable. I had a job that paid the bills, a small apartment that felt warm and lived in, and a woman I believed I would marry someday. I wasn't a man who expected perfection. I simply wanted peace. I thought I had it. But life has a way of changing quietly, before exploding all at once. Her name was Emily. We met in the most ordinary way through a mutual friend at a small backyard barbecue. She was holding a plastic cup of cheap rosé, laughing at some joke I arrived too late to hear. Her laugh came from deep in her stomach, open and honest, and I remember thinking, some people just carry light with them. She seemed like that kind of person. She wasn't the kind of woman who demanded attention. She didn't dress to be noticed. She wore jeans and a loose white t-shirt, her brown hair up in a messy bun, but she radiated something that made the world feel softer. We talked that night for 3 hours straight, about music, movies, Alaska, which she desperately wanted to visit, and how neither of us ever quite grew out of that childhood feeling that we should have figured life out by now. I drove home that night smiling for no reason, the windows down, the radio playing something I didn't really listen to. I just remember thinking she felt different. And for a long time she was. Our relationship didn't look magical from the outside. No whirlwind romance or grand emotional declarations. It was slow, gentle, a friendship that naturally grew into something more. She cooked spaghetti on Sundays because it was the only dish she said she couldn't mess up. I made coffee every morning and always left her the cup with the least chipped handle. On rainy nights we sat on the couch watching terrible reality TV and laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. People think relationships fall apart suddenly. One big moment, one betrayal, one discovery, but that's a lie. They usually fall apart one small disappointment at a time, one ignored feeling, one swallowed thought, one night where we'll talk later never happens. But back then, I didn't see any cracks. I only saw the woman I was falling in love with. I remember the day things quietly shifted, not dramatically, just enough to notice if you were paying attention. And I was, not yet. It was a Thursday evening in early spring. I came home tired after a long day at work, but happy in the way you get when you know someone is waiting for you. I walked into the apartment expecting to hear music playing, or smell something cooking, or at least see her wrapped in a blanket watching something on Netflix. Instead, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring into a glass of water like it was telling her something she didn't want to hear. Her phone was face down, her shoulders stiff. I kissed her on the head. She flinched barely but enough. "Everything okay?" I asked. She smiled too quickly, the kind of smile meant to end the conversation, not start it. "Just tired," she said. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She had no reason to lie, at least none that I could see then. But it didn't stop there. She began pulling away in tiny, hard-to-measure steps. Texts took longer to respond to. Conversations got shorter. Hugs lasted a second less than before. And when I told her good night, she started saying it while already looking at her phone. None of it was big enough to panic over. But together, the pieces were starting to rearrange into something unfamiliar. I tried to be understanding. She had a demanding job. She'd been stressed. She'd always needed space when overwhelmed. Not everyone shuts down in the same way. But the thing that bothered me, the thing I never said out loud, was that she didn't look tired. She looked guilty. I couldn't explain why. There was just something in the way she avoided my eyes when she smiled. Something in the way she kept touching her phone but never unlocked it around me anymore. We had never been the couple that snooped through each other's devices. I never felt I needed to, until suddenly I did. That night lying in bed beside her, I stared at the ceiling long after she fell asleep. I listened to the city hum outside the window, the distant sound of cars on wet pavement. And for the first time, a small, uninvited thought came. What if something is going on? I hated myself for thinking it. I told myself it was insecurity. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself that people who loved each other should trust, and I did trust her. Mostly. I turned on my side and watched her sleep. She looked peaceful, her hair spread across the pillow, her lips slightly parted. The woman I adored, the woman I believed in, the woman I never thought would hurt me. I closed my eyes and forced myself to breathe. Tomorrow, I said silently. Tomorrow will feel like normal again. But tomorrow didn't fix anything. It only revealed more cracks I had been pretending not to see. The next morning, I woke up before Emily. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting faint orange lines across the wall above our bed. I looked at her sleeping beside me and tried to push away the heaviness that had settled in my chest the night before. Relationships go through phases. People have bad weeks. Stress piles up and makes us different versions of ourselves. I told myself all of that while I quietly slipped out of bed and into the kitchen. I started making coffee, fresh grounds, slow pour, the way she liked it. It was a small ritual we shared, something steady in a world that constantly changed. By the time she walked in, her hair messy and her face still soft with sleep, 2 cups were waiting on the counter. She smiled when she saw them, but it wasn't the smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you," she said. She always said thank you, even when the gratitude felt like a layer of politeness instead of something warm and honest. She took her cup but didn't come close to me. Instead, she leaned against the far end of the counter, staring at a small spot on the wall as if thinking about something miles away. "Rough night," I tried. She inhaled slowly and nodded. "Just a lot on my mind." "What kind of a lot?" She looked at me then, but only for a second. "The kind I don't want to unload at 7 in the morning." I let out a quiet laugh, hoping humor would soften the distance. "Fair, need anything from me?" She shook her head. "I'm okay." We went through our usual morning routines, talking about nothing. Weather, traffic, some work email she forgot to respond to. But underneath every word was that same invisible wall. I could feel it even when we were standing inches apart. When she left for work, she kissed me on the cheek. Not the lips, a small detail maybe, but relationships are built on details. When they start to change, you notice. As the apartment door closed behind her, I sat down on the couch and stared at the spot where she'd stood moments earlier. I couldn't say exactly when the feeling became overwhelming, but there it was. Something was wrong, and I didn't know if I was supposed to confront it, ignore it, or pretend I didn't notice at all. That night we had dinner together, take-out pad thai and spring rolls. I'd suggested cooking, but she said she wasn't hungry enough to wait. We ate on the couch, a movie playing on low volume in the background, neither of us paying attention. Halfway through the meal, she turned her phone face down again. The same way she had the night before. The same way she'd been doing all week. She never used to do that. Maybe some people wouldn't think anything of it. Maybe they'd assume she just wanted to be polite. But when the small things change all at once, your intuition notices, even if your heart doesn't want to. Her phone buzzed once. She didn't look at it. Then again. And again. She finally reached over, tapped the screen with her thumb without picking it up, and turned off the sound. "Spam," she said. She didn't even look convincing when she lied. And the worst part was, I didn't call her out. I kept eating, nodding, pretending I believed every word. Because admitting you don't trust someone is sometimes more painful than being lied to. Later, she went to shower. I sat alone on the couch, the glow of the TV flickering across the room. I felt like I was outside my own life, watching it happen through a window. I didn't want to be the kind of man who checked a partner's phone. I still believed in privacy, in trust, in giving someone space. I didn't want to become suspicious and paranoid. But I also didn't want to be a fool. I heard the shower start. The sound of running water filled the apartment. Her phone sat on the coffee table, screen dark, waiting. My stomach twisted. My hands went cold. I stared at it for a full minute, wrestling with myself. I thought of all the couples who never meant to lose each other but did, simply because they didn't ask the questions that needed asking. Finally, I stood up and walked to the bathroom door. I didn't knock. I didn't speak. I just leaned my forehead gently against the wood and said quietly, "Emily, is everything okay with us?" The water didn't stop, but I heard her inhale sharply, too sharply to be casual. There was a long pause. Then she answered, "Of course it is." But her voice was thin, and even though she couldn't see me, I shook my head. It didn't feel like the truth. I walked back to the couch and sat down. Her phone was still there, as if daring me to pick it up. I didn't touch it. I just stared at the reflection of the ceiling light on the screen and felt something shift inside me, something I hadn't wanted to feel. Fear. Not fear of losing her. Fear of realizing I already had. She came out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel, water dripping from her hair. She looked tired, not physically, but in the soul-deep way you do when you're carrying something heavy and quiet inside. She sat beside me. Not close, just beside. Her hand rested on her knee. Mine rested on the cushion between us. "Want to talk?" I asked gently. "Not tonight," she whispered. "Okay." She reached for my hand. For a second I thought she was going to hold it, maybe even open up, tell me what was happening. Instead, she picked up the TV remote that was lying next to me. She didn't look at my face once. It's funny looking back. That moment wasn't dramatic. No screaming, no accusations, no tears. Just silence. But that silence told me more than any fight could. Something was breaking. And we were both pretending not to hear it. That night after she fell asleep, I lay awake again, just like the night before. I watched the ceiling, listened to the city outside, tried to calm the unease twisting through my chest. I tried to be rational. She was stressed. Work was overwhelming. Maybe she was just distancing emotionally, because she didn't want to burden me. But there was another voice in my head, one I didn't want to acknowledge. People don't hide their phones from the ones they love, unless there's something they don't want them to see. I hated that voice, because deep down I knew it wasn't wrong. I closed my eyes and forced myself to breathe through the ache in my chest. Tomorrow, I promised again. Tomorrow will tell me more. But deep down I knew. Tomorrow wasn't going to fix anything. Tomorrow was going to begin the unraveling. The next few days passed in a strange, quiet routine. Nothing explosive happened. No obvious confession. No dramatic confrontation. But every interaction felt like it was happening with a glass wall between us, transparent enough to see through, solid enough that I couldn't reach her. She still smiled. Still said good morning. Still kissed me before leaving for work. But she was somewhere else. Her mind, her attention, her energy. It was all drifting, inch by inch, towards something I couldn't see. Or someone. I wasn't ready to admit that yet, but the thought kept growing like a shadow stretching across the floor, getting longer every day as the sun went down. On Saturday, we were supposed to have a date night. Nothing fancy, just dinner at a small Italian place we liked, the kind with brick walls, dim lighting, and handwritten menu boards. It wasn't special, but it was ours. We hadn't been out together in weeks, and I told myself this was exactly what we needed. A night to reconnect. A night to remember we still worked, even if things felt shaky. She came home late, dropping her purse on the table with a tired sigh that was almost too rehearsed. "Sorry, work ran long." I nodded. "Still up for dinner?" She hesitated for half a heartbeat. Yeah, sure, let me shower first. I watched her disappear down the hall, and a feeling I didn't want to recognize settled in my chest. She didn't want to go. She was going through the motions for my sake, or for appearances. I sat there, listening to the sound of the running water again, remembering the previous nights, replaying every tiny moment that didn't feel right. When she came out, she looked beautiful, hair done, dress I hadn't seen her wear in months. She smelled like the perfume she used to save for special occasions. I wanted to believe that meant something. I wanted to believe she chose all that for me. But when we walked to the car, her phone buzzed again. She looked down. Her expression flickered, 1 second, maybe less. But enough for me to see it. A message that changed her face before she put the mask back on. She typed a quick reply, turned the screen off, and slid the phone into her purse. "I'm sorry," she said before I could ask. "Work thing." Maybe she thought I believed her. And maybe a part of me still wanted to. At the restaurant, the waiter seated us at a corner table near the window. Soft music played overhead and candles flickered between wine glasses. A couple at the next table laughed loudly, holding hands across the table. I remember thinking how easy they looked together. Natural. Connected. We used to look like that. Now we sat across from each other, carefully choosing our words like we were afraid the wrong one might break something fragile. "How was your day?" I asked. She shrugged, sipping her water. "Busy. Everything was busy lately." "What about you?" she asked. "Same old." The conversation died immediately. We ate in silence for a while, the sound of clinking silverware and distant laughter filling the space between us. At one point, she set her fork down and looked at me. Not long, but long enough for something unspoken to pass between us. "Are you okay?" she asked. It wasn't what I expected. Usually, I was the one asking that. "I'm trying to be," I said honestly. She looked down at her plate. "I know." Nothing else. No reassurance. No explanation. Just "I know." If she had looked at me then, really looked, I think I would have said everything. The fears, the doubts, the sinking feeling that I was losing her without understanding why. But she didn't look. And I didn't speak. Two people drowning quietly across the same table. After dinner, we walked to the car in silence. The night was cool and calm, the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. When we stopped at a crosswalk, she reached for her phone again. Another message. Another flicker in her expression. "You don't have to hide it, you know," I said softly. Her head snapped up. "What?" "The phone." She swallowed, visibly tensing. "I'm not hiding anything." But her voice was too quick, too defensive. I didn't push. Not yet. We got in the car and drove home. Emily stared out the passenger window the entire ride, her fingers playing nervously with the strap of her purse. I gripped the steering wheel and tried to calm the storm building quietly in my chest. When we got home, she disappeared into the bedroom without a word. I stayed in the living room, sitting in the dim light of a single lamp, listening to the faint sounds of her moving around on the other side of the wall. I wanted to go to her, to hold her, to ask her what was happening. But fear kept me sitting. Fear of the answer. Fear of hearing out loud what I already suspected. A few minutes later, she walked out wearing pajama shorts and one of my old t-shirts. She paused when she saw me still sitting there. "You're not coming to bed." "Not yet," I said quietly. She nodded slowly, as if she understood more than she wanted to say. "Okay, good night." "Good night." She went into the bedroom and closed the door gently, not slammed, not careless, just softly enough to make it feel like she was trying not to wake a sleeping house. I stared at that closed door for a long time. Then, like I'd been programmed to, I finally broke. I stood up, walked into the dark kitchen, and leaned on the counter with both hands. The room was silent except for the ticking of a cheap wall clock we'd bought at a flea market the previous summer. Tick, tick, tick. Every second sounded like another piece of my life, slipping into a version I didn't want to accept. Finally, I whispered the question out loud. What do I do? The silence didn't answer. Eventually, I went to the bedroom. The lights were off. Emily was already under the covers, her back turned to me, shoulders curled tight like she was protecting herself from something. I slid into bed, careful not to shake the mattress, and lay on my back staring at the ceiling again. This was becoming a ritual. She slept, I thought. The city hummed outside, and the world quietly shifted without us acknowledging it. I turned my head, looking at her silhouette in the dark. I missed her, even though she was right there. And that was the moment, quiet, ordinary, undramatic, when I finally admitted the truth to myself. I was losing the person I loved. And she was slipping away so slowly that by the time I realized it, she might already be gone. But tomorrow I decided I would stop pretending. Tomorrow, the conversation would happen, whether she wanted it or not. Morning arrived too quickly. I must have fallen asleep close to dawn, because when my alarm went off, my body felt heavy, unprepared. I blinked against the sunlight leaking through the curtains and turned my head. Emily was already awake. She sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed for work, staring down at her hands. She didn't notice I was looking. That's how far away her mind was. When she finally stood, she said quietly, I made coffee. Her voice didn't have warmth, just information. Thanks, I answered, forcing a small smile. She nodded and walked out of the room. I sat there for a long moment, gathering the courage I thought I'd find overnight. I had told myself that today I would stop pretending, that I would finally ask the questions that were eating away at my sanity. But when I stood up, my legs felt weak. Not physically, emotionally. It's strange how confronting the truth feels harder than living with the lie. In the kitchen, the smell of coffee filled the air. Emily stood by the counter, staring at the window. Her phone lay next to her cup, screen down as always. I poured myself coffee and leaned against the opposite counter. We need to talk, I said softly. Her shoulders tensed just barely. I know, she whispered. That alone was confirmation. People who are innocent usually ask. About what? But she already knew. I took a deep breath. How long has something been wrong? She closed her eyes for a moment, then turned to face me. Her expression wasn't angry, just sad. I don't know. That's not an answer, Emily. She set her cup down carefully, as if even ceramic might break under the weight of this conversation. I've just been distant, work is. Don't, I cut in gently. Don't make this about work, I know you. I know when something is hurting you, and this, whatever this is, it's not spreadsheets or deadlines. Her eyes flickered with something, guilt, fear, both. She swallowed. I just need space. I stared at her. Space. The word felt like a blade disguised as air. Space from me, I asked quietly. She didn't answer. That silence was louder than shouting. I thought I'd feel angry, betrayed, defensive. Instead, I just felt the floor tilt beneath my feet, like the world had shifted and I wasn't stable anymore. I nodded slowly. Okay, space. I can understand that, but you have to tell me what's really going on. I'm not a mind reader. Am I losing you? Her face crumpled for a second, soft, heartbreaking, but she turned away before I could read it fully. No, she said quickly, too quickly. It's not that. Then what is it? She didn't speak. Not right away. And in that pause, the truth settled between us without sound. There was someone else. Even before she said anything, I knew. I didn't need evidence. I didn't need a confession. Humans know when they're being replaced. Finally, she spoke. I don't feel like myself lately. It was a half-truth. The kind people use when the real truth is heavier than they want to carry. I walked around the counter until I stood right in front of her, close enough to touch, close enough to see tears building at the corners of her eyes. "Emily," I said softly, "I love you, but something is happening here, and we either talk about it honestly or we break alone." Her mouth trembled. She looked at me with eyes full of something, regret maybe, but then her phone buzzed on the counter. The sound cut through the moment like a knife. She flinched. Her eyes darted toward the phone. Reflex, instinct, habit. I didn't look at the screen. I didn't ask who it was. Because now I knew. Her reaction said more than any message could. She grabbed the phone, silenced it, and shoved it into her purse. "I have to go," she whispered. "That message mattered," I said quietly. She froze. I didn't even look at it. "That's the problem," I answered. "You didn't have to." She closed her eyes again, and for the first time a tear slid down her cheek. "I never wanted this to happen," she said, voice breaking. There it was. Not a confession. Not details. Just the emotional truth. And emotional truths are often more honest than factual ones. I stepped back, suddenly feeling cold. "Are you in love with someone else?" Her breath caught. She didn't answer. She didn't deny it. That silence again was the answer. She finally whispered, "I don't know." Which meant yes, or close enough that the difference didn't matter. She grabbed her purse and headed toward the door. Before leaving, she paused, her hand resting on the frame. "I need time." I nodded slowly. "Take what you need." She hesitated. "I'm sorry." Then she walked out. The door closed with a soft click. No slamming. No dramatic exit. Just a quiet ending to the life I thought we were building. When she was gone, I sat at the kitchen table staring at her half-finished cup of coffee. Steam still rose from it. She had taken 2 sips, just enough to pretend everything was normal. But nothing was normal anymore. I sat there for a long time, trying to breathe, trying to make sense of the numbness spreading through my chest. I wasn't someone who cried easily, but in that moment, I felt something break inside me. Not loud. Not sudden. Just quietly. The way real heartbreak usually happens. Later that afternoon, I picked up my phone and stared at our last text conversation. It was nothing emotional, just groceries, schedules, and reminders. But reading it now felt surreal, like I was looking at messages from another lifetime. I typed, "Can we talk tonight?" I stared at the blinking cursor for a long moment. Then I erased the message. Talking wouldn't fix anything until she wanted to be honest, until she was ready to tell me who, or what, she was choosing instead of me. Instead, I set the phone down, leaned back in my chair, and whispered the truth I hadn't allowed myself to say out loud until now. I'm losing her. Not maybe. Not possibly. Not if things don't change. I was already losing her. The only thing I didn't know yet was whether she had already let go completely. I didn't see Emily for the rest of the day. She texted once around 6 p.m., a short message that felt like a formality more than communication. "Working late, don't wait up." No heart emoji. No warmth. No love you. Just information. I stared at that message for a long time, wondering how long we had been exchanging logistics instead of affection. When had our conversation stopped being us and turned into schedules, reminders, calendars, and silence? I typed back, "Okay, be safe." Even that felt too intimate for the distance between us, but leaving it unanswered felt worse. I set the phone down and stood in the middle of the living room, not knowing what to do with myself. The apartment felt too quiet, too spacious, too empty of the person who used to fill it without talking. How could someone still live in your home and feel like a memory at the same time? Around 9 p.m., I finally forced myself into activity. I washed dishes, wiped down the counters, took out the trash, chores for the sake of not drowning in my own thoughts. But nothing helped. My mind kept rewinding the morning conversation, picking apart every sentence and silence like evidence in a case no one wanted to prosecute. By the time I realized that sitting awake in my own head was torture, I grabbed my keys and stepped outside. The spring air was cool enough to sting a little. The streetlights flickered on wet sidewalks left from rain earlier that afternoon. I didn't have a destination. I just needed to move. I walked past the coffee shop where Emily and I used to sit on lazy Sunday mornings, sharing pastries and complaining about how adulthood never came with an instruction manual. I walked past the bus stop bench where she once spilled her milkshake all over my lap, and we laughed so hard we cried. I walked past the park entrance where she used to tug my hand and say, "Come on, 5 minutes of fresh air won't hurt you." Those were the moments I never thought I'd miss. You never realize what parts of your life are precious until they stop happening. I sat on a bench beneath a street lamp and tilted my head back, staring at the night sky swallowed by city glow. The ache in my chest had settled into something heavy, like a stone was pressing against my ribs. And that's when the thought came, uninvited, unwelcome, but unavoidable. If she's falling for someone else, who is he? I hated thinking it. Hated the images it summoned. Hated the jealousy, the insecurity, the fear. But I also hated the not knowing. In the silence of that empty street, I whispered to myself, I just want the truth. Because the truth, even if painful, is at least solid. You can stand on it, build something from it, heal from it. It's the uncertainty that kills you slowly. By the time I returned home, it was close to midnight. Emily still wasn't back. I sat on the couch, TV on mute, volume replaced by the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking wall clock that sounded louder with every passing minute. 12:04, 12:19, 12:37. At 12:42, the sound of a key in the lock made my heart jolt, not with fear but with something more complicated, hope mixed with dread. Emily stepped inside quietly, a little too quietly, like she didn't want the floorboards to notice. She froze when she saw me awake. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey, you're still up." I nodded, couldn't sleep. She set her purse down. Her hair wasn't messy from wind. Her makeup hadn't faded. She looked good. Too good for someone who spent a 15-hour day at the office. "You should have rested," she said, not meeting my eyes. I wanted to talk. She closed her eyes for 1 second, like my words physically hurt. "Not tonight," she whispered, "please." I almost said, "If not tonight, then when?" But I swallowed the question. She was exhausted or pretending to be, and honestly, I didn't have the strength to fight. I just nodded. She disappeared into the bedroom and closed the door. I sat there for another 10 minutes before finally following her. She was already in bed, turned away again, exactly like the night before. I slid under the covers and lay there staring at the ceiling. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I finally fell asleep. It was the sound of a buzzing phone that woke me. Not mine. Hers. I blinked in the dark, slowly coming back to my senses. Emily was asleep, deep sleep, the kind where the body goes limp and breath turns slow. Her phone sat on the nightstand, screen lighting the room faintly with each vibration. One buzz. Pause. Another. Someone was texting her at 2, 17 a.m. My pulse began to hammer in my ears. I rolled onto my side and stared at that glowing rectangle as if it were radioactive. I didn't touch it. I didn't even move. But when the screen lit up again, this time I saw part of a notification before it faded. A preview. A name. Daniel. And below it, "Can't stop thinking about you." My breath left my lungs. It felt like someone had just driven something sharp through my ribs, not metaphorically but physically. My vision dimmed for a second. I closed my eyes slowly, as if that would undo what I saw. It didn't. I lay there completely still, staring at the ceiling in the dark while Emily slept next to me, unaware that the world had just collapsed in my chest. I didn't confront her. I didn't shake her awake. I didn't shout. I just lay there trying to breathe past the ache that hollowed out something deep inside me. For a long time, I didn't move at all. Eventually, I got up quietly and walked out into the living room, closing the bedroom door behind me. I sat on the couch, put my face in my hands, and finally let reality in. She hadn't just drifted. She hadn't just been distant. She was already giving her heart to someone else. And I never even saw it happening. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe minutes, maybe hours. The silence of the apartment felt different now, heavier, as if the walls themselves knew what I'd seen and were bracing for impact. At some point, I stood up and walked to the bathroom. I splashed cold water on my face, gripping the sides of the sink to steady myself. My reflection in the mirror looked like a man I didn't recognize. I had been a boyfriend yesterday. Now I was something else. A man living with a woman who loved another. At 6:40 a.m., Emily came out of the bedroom. She froze when she saw me sitting on the couch, still awake. "You didn't sleep." I looked at her. Really looked. She wasn't wearing guilt. She was wearing fear. Not fear of hurting me. Fear of being confronted. She walked toward the kitchen, putting distance between us by habit. She poured herself coffee, back turned. And that's when the words left my mouth before I could think. "Who is Daniel?" The mug in her hand stopped mid-motion. Her back went rigid. Slowly, painfully slowly, she set the mug down and turned around. Her eyes were wide, voice barely a whisper. "You saw a message." "I didn't touch your phone," I said. It lit up. I was awake. Silence. Her mouth parted, but nothing came out. I stood. "I'm not angry," I said quietly. "I'm not here to scream, I just need the truth. Who is he?" She pressed her fingers to her lips like she could physically stop the words from escaping. Tears shimmered in her eyes before she finally answered. "He's someone from work." Just 6 words. 6 simple words that felt like a bullet. I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "How long?" She didn't answer. "Emily," I said, "how long?" She finally whispered. 3 months. 3 months. 90 days. While I was drinking morning coffee with her, kissing her goodnight, cooking dinner, watching movies on the couch, trying to understand what I was doing wrong. She had been falling in love with someone else. Something inside me shattered, not in anger, but in grief so deep it didn't even feel real. I swallowed hard. "Do you love him?" She covered her mouth and started crying. "I don't know," she choked out. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "No one ever means for it to happen," I interrupted softly. She wiped at her cheeks desperately. I was lonely, okay, and we stopped talking and everything felt routine, and with him I just felt seen. I finished. She stared at me, eyes wide. "Yes," she whispered. I nodded slowly. It hurt like hell. But I understood. People don't cheat because they find someone hotter. They cheat because they feel something with another person, They stopped feeling at home. I leaned back against the counter, hands shaking slightly. "So what now?" I asked. She sank into a chair, wiping her face. "I don't know," she whispered. "I feel lost." Lost. Not sorry. Not horrified. Lost. I took a long breath. "Do you want to fix this?" The silence that followed was the longest of my life. Her eyes dropped to the table. "I don't know." There it was. The answer that wasn't an answer. The truth that said everything without saying anything. She didn't know if she wanted me anymore. I nodded. "Then until you do know," I said quietly, "I can't keep living like this." She finally looked up, eyes red and shining. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need space too. Real space. Not in the same bed pretending everything's okay." She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. "I'm so sorry," she whispered through tears. I closed my eyes. "I know." And I meant it in a strange way. She hadn't set out to hurt me. People never plan to burn the house down while they're still living in it. But intentions don't erase consequences. That morning, while she sat crying quietly at the kitchen table, I walked to the bedroom and began packing a small bag. Not because I wanted to leave forever, but because I needed to breathe somewhere that didn't hurt to look at. A toothbrush. 3 shirts. 2 pairs of jeans. Phone charger. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to stay with a friend for a few nights. Emily stayed in the kitchen the entire time, head in her hands, unable to watch me leave but unable to stop me either. When I finally stepped toward the door, she stood up. "Please," she whispered, "don't hate me." I turned and met her eyes. "I don't," I said softly. "Hating you would be easier than loving you like this." Her lips trembled. She didn't speak. I reached for the doorknob. Before leaving, I said the last thing I could manage. "When you're ready to tell me whether you're choosing him or me, call." Then I walked out. The door clicked shut behind me, gentle, final, real. And for the first time since this all began, I finally let myself break. I didn't cry until I was already halfway across the city. I'd taken the old overnight bus, not because it was practical, but because the silence of a rideshare or the tightness of a taxi would have suffocated me. The bus was mostly empty. 2 teenagers at the back listening to music, an old man asleep near the window, and me in the middle seat staring out at the blurred city lights sliding past the glass like rain. Every bump in the road rattled something loose inside me. I pressed the back of my wrist against my eyes, trying not to come apart in a way that would make strangers worry or notice. But the pain didn't ask for permission. It just arrived, raw and unstoppable. There is a special kind of heartbreak that has no screaming, no thrown plates, no slammed doors, just the quiet realization that the future you were building now belongs to someone else. That was what broke me. I was losing her, not to tragedy or cruelty, but to circumstance and emotional erosion, a slow leak neither of us had noticed until the floor was flooded. By the time the bus reached the stop near my friend Alex's apartment, my chest felt carved hollow. I got off, slung my bag over my shoulder, and walked through the cool dawn air toward the building's entrance. The sky was barely turning pink when I buzzed his door. There was a long pause, a static crackle, then a half-asleep voice. "Who the hell is?" "It's me," I said quietly. The silence on the other end changed instantly. The door clicked open. Alex wasn't the kind of friend who needed explanations before action. He opened the apartment door, took one look at me, then didn't say a word, just stepped forward and pulled me into a rough hug, like he was physically trying to hold the pieces of me together. Only after a minute did he step back and ask, "Talk or sleep first?" "Talk," I said, voice unsteady. He nodded and walked into the kitchen, flicking on the soft overhead light. The apartment smelled like coffee grounds, detergent, and the vague loneliness of a man who lived alone, but hadn't quite given up on making the place look comfortable. I sank onto one of the bar stools at the counter, elbows on the surface, hands covering part of my face. Alex set two mugs in front of us and leaned against the sink. "Okay," he said quietly, "tell me." I didn't know where to start, so the words came out in fragments. "She's been seeing someone else." His eyes narrowed, not with surprise but with sympathy. "How long?" "3 months." Alex swore under his breath. "And she told you that herself?" "She didn't have a choice. I saw a message on her phone." The scene replayed in my mind with brutal clarity. The glowing notification, the words I shouldn't have seen, the name I didn't recognize but would never forget. Alex rubbed a hand down his face. "I'm sorry, man." It was the simplest sentence in the language, and still the only one that made sense. I stared into the coffee, voice barely above a whisper. "I thought we were just going through a rough patch. I thought we were fixable." Alex's expression softened. "You were fixable," he said gently. "She just stopped trying." That was it, wasn't it? Relationships don't die when things get hard. They die when one person decides the fight isn't worth the bruises anymore. We talked for more than an hour. About Emily, about the last few months, about the moment I'd walked out. Alex listened the way a brother would, without judgment or forced optimism. When I finished, he exhaled and shook his head slowly. "So what now?" I stared at the counter, fingers tracing idle circles on the wood. "I don't know. I told her to call me when she knows who she's choosing." Alex's eyebrows rose slightly. "Bold." I didn't feel bold, I felt wrecked. He nodded. "That's usually how courage looks from the inside." I huffed a humorless laugh. "Doesn't feel like courage." "No," he agreed. "It feels like bleeding." He wasn't wrong. At some point, exhaustion hit me all at once. Alex pointed to the guest room and told me to sleep. I collapsed face first onto the bed and didn't even bother with the sheets. For the first few seconds, I lay completely still, brain buzzing, body humming with caffeine, adrenaline, and heartbreak. But sleep crashed over me harder than expected. When I woke, it was late afternoon. Sunlight poured through the blinds, stripping the wall with sharp white lines. I sat up slowly, head pounding with dehydration and emotional hangover. For the first few seconds, I forgot where I was. Then I remembered everything. The message, the tears, the packed bag, the kitchen table, her silence. My chest tightened as if someone had placed a brick directly on top of my sternum. I checked my phone. No messages from Emily. I didn't know whether relief or disappointment hurt more. Alex was working in the living room when I came out. He glanced up, took one look at me and stood. "You need real food," he said. "I'm not hungry." That wasn't a question. 10 minutes later, there was a plate of pasta in front of me. I forced myself to eat, not because I wanted to, but because heartbreak is exhausting, and survival sometimes looks like chewing food you can barely swallow. After lunch, Alex sat across from me, hands folded. "Look," he said, "I'm not telling you to move on. I'm not telling you to hate her. But you need to prepare for the possibility that she won't choose you." The words sliced deeper than he probably intended. "I know," I said quietly. "Good, because if she doesn't, that's on her, not you." I swallowed hard, staring at my water glass. "I keep wondering what I did wrong." Alex shook his head immediately. "No, don't go down that road. You didn't cheat. You didn't leave first. You showed up." I let out a slow, thin breath. "Then why was that enough?" He leaned back. "Because love is a two-player game. You can't win it alone." I couldn't argue with that. For the next few hours, I existed without purpose, scrolling through my phone, not reading anything, lying on my back staring at the ceiling, taking a shower I didn't remember from start to finish. Pain has a way of pulling time apart until every minute feels like three. By evening, Alex suggested a walk. We ended up sitting on the swings of the small playground behind his building. Two grown men pretending the motion made us feel less trapped inside our own heads. "You think she'll actually call?" Alex asked. "I think she'll think about calling," I said softly. "Whether she follows through, that's different. And if she calls and chooses you?" I looked out at the dimming sky. "If she chooses me, I'm not just coming back. We'd need therapy, real talks, real work, because trust ruptured like that doesn't just grow back." "And if she chooses him?" I swallowed. "Then I'll let her go." It felt like the hardest sentence I'd ever spoken. Alex nodded slowly. "And what if she doesn't choose at all?" That possibility hit differently, heavier, more terrifying. Because limbo is worse than loss. Loss ends. Limbo drags on until you can't breathe. "If she doesn't choose," I said quietly, "then I'll make the choice for both of us." Around 9 p.m., back at the apartment, my phone buzzed. My heart leapt into my throat. It was Emily. Just a delivery notification from a pharmacy. I'd never hated a harmless text so much in my life. I slumped onto the couch, massaging my temples. The grief was still there, big, dark, and relentless, but now another emotion began creeping in beneath it. Anger. Not the explosive kind, but the quiet, dignified anger of a man who suddenly realizes, I deserved honesty before I saw those messages. Because cheating is bad enough, but being left to think you're simply not trying hard enough is cruelty disguised as silence. The more I replayed the last few months in my head, the more I realized I had been fighting for two. She had already checked out. Maybe she didn't mean to. Maybe it wasn't malicious. Maybe Daniel wasn't the problem. Maybe he was a symptom. But the truth was still brutal. While I was trying to repair cracks, she was building a new foundation somewhere else. And no matter how logical I tried to be, that broke something inside me. Around midnight, while Alex was in his room, I stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the street. Cars passed below, headlights like slow, glowing ghosts drifting through the night. The sky was dark, the air cool, and my thoughts restless. I took a deep breath and finally said something aloud I hadn't yet admitted even to myself. "I don't know if I can forgive her." "Not yet. Maybe not ever." Forgiveness requires the one who hurt you to meet you halfway. And right now, I didn't even know if she wanted to walk toward me or away. I leaned on the railing, staring into the night, and said another truth. One that tasted like metal in my mouth. "And I don't know if she still loves me." The silence that followed felt like confirmation. Back inside, I lay down on the couch, not because Alex didn't offer the guest bed, but because I needed the discomfort. Something in me felt unworthy of rest. Heartbreak does that. It makes you feel like you owe the universe penance for not seeing the disaster sooner. I closed my eyes. But sleep didn't come. I kept replaying her face at the kitchen table, the way her eyes filled with tears when I asked if she wanted to fix us. "I don't know." 3 words that hurt more than a confession of love for another man. Because uncertainty is its own kind of answer. Around 3:14 a.m. my phone buzzed. My breath caught. "Emily." I stared at the screen, hand trembling. Her message was short. "I can't sleep, I miss you." My heart clenched. She missed me. Not him. Me. But the message didn't say she chose me. Didn't say she was ending things. Didn't say she was ready to fight for us. She just missed the comfort of what we had. A tear slid down my cheek. I typed, then erased it, typed again, erased again, because anything I wrote would either be too honest or not honest enough. Finally, I sent, "We need to talk, but not at 3 a.m. Sleep, we'll figure it out soon." I stared at the screen, waiting for a reply. None came. After a long minute, I set the phone down and lay back, arm over my eyes, chest tight. The message should have comforted me. Instead, it broke me even more. Because missing someone doesn't mean choosing them. And I was finally realizing this story wasn't about who she loved more, Daniel or me. It was about whether she still loved herself in the life we built. And until she answered that, I was living in the aftermath of a war with no winner. I woke up far earlier than I meant to. The sky outside Alex's living room window was still dark blue, and the city was just beginning to hum with early traffic. I sat up slowly, rubbing my face with both hands. My body felt heavy, limbs tired, head full of fog, a combination of too little sleep and too much thinking. For a long moment, I simply stared at my phone lying on the coffee table. No new messages. Her last text from hours earlier, "I miss you," still sat at the bottom of the screen like a question with no answer. Alex came out of his room a little later, hair a mess, eyes half open. He looked at me, sighed, and went straight to the kitchen to start coffee. "You slept?" "A little." He poured me a mug and sat across from me, elbows on his knees. "You hear from her?" I nodded. "She sent a message at 3 in the morning." "What did she say?" "That she misses me." Alex's expression didn't change, but I could see the gears turning. "And what did you tell her?" "That we need to talk later, not in the middle of the night." "Good," he said, "because I miss you isn't a decision." I huffed a tired breath. "No, it's a comfort blanket." "Exactly." I took a sip of coffee. It tasted strong and burnt, but I needed it. "Are you going to call her?" Alex asked. "I'm trying to give her space, but at the same time, I don't want silence to become the decision." He tapped his fingers on the counter thoughtfully. "Then give it until noon. If she hasn't reached out by then, you call." I nodded. It was weird letting someone else set rules for my emotional crisis, but I needed structure. Heartbreak turns your brain into soup. Sometimes you need someone outside of the pain to simplify the battlefield. The hours between 7 a.m. and noon were agonizing. I showered, made breakfast, pretended to watch TV, walked around the living room like an animal packing a cage. Everything reminded me of home, of her, of mornings when she'd be in the kitchen humming while making toast, when our biggest argument was who finished the oat milk. By 10:30, my phone finally buzzed. "Emily, can we meet today?" My heart kicked hard in my chest. The message was simple, understated, but real. Not nostalgia, not longing, action. I typed, "Yes, when?" She replied a minute later. "I'm off work at 4, come home." Being asked to return to the apartment that no longer felt entirely mine was surreal. Part of me wanted to say no, that we should meet in a neutral space, but another part of me knew that the conversation needed to happen where everything broke. I answered, "I'll be there." She sent, "Okay." No heart, no exclamation mark, just 3 letters that could mean anything. Alex looked up from the couch. "That her?" I nodded. "We're talking at 4. He gave a short nod. "You want advice?" "Always." He stretched his legs, leaned forward, and spoke carefully. "Listen more than you speak. Don't defend yourself until you know what you're defending against, and don't accept blame that isn't yours." I let the words sink in. "And if she asks you to fight for her," he continued, "make sure she's fighting too." I left at 3:15. I took the subway this time, needing the distraction of movement and strangers. The city buzzed outside the window, unbothered by the fact that someone's life was about to get redefined in the next hour. At 4:00 sharp, I stood in front of our building. My keycard still worked. The elevator felt smaller than usual, like the walls were made of pressure instead of metal. My stomach turned as the doors slid open on our floor. I walked down the hallway. Home. Except I wasn't sure it was home anymore. I stood in front of the front door, took a slow breath, and knocked softly. For a moment there was no sound. Then I heard footsteps approaching. The lock turned and the door opened. Emily stood there wearing jeans and a white sweater, her hair pulled back, face bare of makeup. She looked tired, far more than yesterday. Eyes red, shoulders tense. She stepped aside. "Come in." Her voice was small, almost fragile. I entered. The apartment smelled the same: candle wax, laundry detergent, and her favorite sweet citrus diffuser. But everything felt unfamiliar. Something in the air had shifted. The home I left last night wasn't the same one I walked into now. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where everything had cracked open less than 24 hours ago. I sat across from her. For a moment neither of us spoke. The silence was thick and painful. She finally cleared her throat. "Thank you for coming." I said I would. She nodded. "I didn't sleep much." "Me neither." Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve, tiny, nervous movements. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "Yes." Another long pause. Finally, I asked the question that had been eating at me since I found that message. "Are you in love with him?" She inhaled sharply, looked down at the table, and tears welled in her eyes. "I don't know." I closed my eyes briefly. "Do you love me?" "Yes," she answered instantly. No hesitation. No confusion. She loved me. But she didn't know if she loved him. Which meant she loved two people, just in different ways. That realization hurt more than any message notification ever could. She wiped at her eyes. "I never meant for this to happen." "I know. I didn't go looking for it." "I believe you." She swallowed. "We worked together. We talked a lot. And then at some point, talking became something else. Something I didn't realize was crossing a line until I had already crossed it." I sat still. No anger. No shouting. Just listening. Emily continued, voice shaking. "I didn't tell you because I was afraid. Not of you, but of what admitting it would make real. I kept hoping I could figure it out on my own, but it only got more complicated." I nodded. "When did it start?" "A few months after the promotion." The promotion that I had celebrated with her. The one I was so proud of. The milestone she used to leave me emotionally, bit by bit. She stared at her hands. At first, he just listened. I felt understood, appreciated, seen. We talked about work, stress, goals, then eventually about things I wasn't telling you. "That's emotional cheating, Emily." She nodded, eyes full of shame. "I know." Then it became physical. A tear slid down her cheek. "Yes." The final confirmation. I leaned back slowly, heart heavy but steady. "Do you want to be with him?" She shook her head immediately. "I don't know if I want to be with him. I just didn't want to feel alone anymore." That sentence landed like a punch. "You were lonely with me." She looked up, eyes broken. "I was lonely inside myself. And I didn't tell you because I was embarrassed that the person I love couldn't fix it for me." I swallowed. "Because I didn't know." "Yes." Silence hung between us again. She took a shaky breath. "I'm not going to lie or make excuses. I betrayed you. I crossed lines I can't uncross, and I'm not asking you to pretend that didn't happen. I nodded slowly. She looked directly at me with eyes full of pain. But I want to try. If you still want me, I want to try, not for comfort, not because I'm scared of being alone, but because I still love you and I don't want this to be the end of us. Does he know? She shook her head. He has no idea I told you. He thinks we're still whatever we are. And what are you? She hesitated before answering. Wrong. It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was honest. I leaned forward. I need one thing from you, if we even consider fixing this. Emily wiped her eyes, bracing herself. Anything. You cut contact with him, completely, today. She blinked. That's fair. And if there's something between you and him that you feel like you need closure for, that conversation happens with me present or not at all. She nodded again, staring down at her hands. Okay. And we go to counseling, together and separately. Yes. And no more hiding. I want the whole truth even if it hurts. She closed her eyes as more tears slipped free. I'll tell you everything. I took a slow breath. And if after hearing everything, I can't stay, then that's the consequence. She didn't argue, didn't beg, didn't bargain. I understand. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I loved, the woman who hurt me, the woman who was hurting herself, the woman who was sitting here now, terrified but trying. Emily, I said quietly. She met my eyes. I continued. This can only work if you want us. Not the comfort, not the routine, not the stability, us. She nodded slowly. I do. Do you want him? She inhaled, exhaled shakily, and answered with brutal honesty. I wanted the version of myself I was when I was with him. Loud, confident, alive. But I don't want him more than I want to be the woman I promised you I'd be. I sat there in silence. It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was human. Finally I said, then we start at zero. Her voice cracked. If you'll have me. I nodded once. But this time we rebuild with open eyes. She let out a sob of relief, covering her face with both hands. I reached forward slowly, hesitantly, and took her hands away from her face. Her skin was damp with tears. For the first time in months, we held hands, not like lovers, not like strangers, but like two people realizing they were either going to rise together or drown separately. And both of us were terrified to find out which one it would be. Rebuilding after betrayal is not cinematic. There are no dramatic music swells, no poetic transitions, no overnight transformations. It's more like learning to walk again after a bone has been set. The structure may heal, but it will always remember where it broke. The first week after our conversation was the hardest. On Monday morning, Emily blocked Daniel on everything: phone, email, social media. She sent a single message before she did, one she showed me beforehand. I need to repair what I destroyed. I won't be part of this anymore. Do not contact me again. She hit send. Then block. Then deleted his number. She didn't cry afterward. She just sat at the table staring at the phone like someone who had just buried something, not a person, but a version of herself she no longer trusted. I didn't comfort her. Not because I didn't want to, but because she needed to hold the consequence in both hands without me cushioning it. That was the first rule of rebuilding. If I carried all the pain, she'd never learn the weight of her choices. The apartment became a strange, emotional landscape. Every room had echoes of what we used to be and ghosts of what we almost became. We slept in the same bed, but faced opposite walls. Some nights we didn't touch. Some nights we held hands without speaking. Some nights we just lay there, two people breathing into the silence, not sure whether to close the distance or widen it. We started therapy, together and separately. Our couple's therapist, Dr. Lawson, was calm and disarmingly honest. She didn't play referee. She treated betrayal not as a crime to be prosecuted, but as a fracture requiring clean alignment before healing could begin. Her first words to us were, "Infidelity isn't always about cheating on a person. Sometimes it's about cheating on a version of yourself you abandoned." Emily started crying before the session even began. I didn't. Not because I wasn't hurting. God knows I was. But because my body had learned to turn pain into quiet. On the fourth day, Emily told me the full story. Every message, every meeting, every lie she told to cover the ones that came before. It took hours. Some details cut deeper than I expected. Small things, ordinary things. A lunch they shared at a cafe she used to go to with me. A song he recommended that was now in her playlist. A joke they quoted between them. Infidelity is not defined by sex. It's defined by the thousand small choices that pave the road to it. When she finished, she looked at me like a prisoner waiting for a verdict. I sat still, letting the truth settle, not into forgiveness, not into resentment, just into realism. Finally, I asked only one question. When did you start feeling like I couldn't see you anymore? Her answer broke something I didn't want to acknowledge. A long time before he showed up. The following week, I began to confront things I had avoided. I had been emotionally distant. Not cruel, not dismissive, but absorbed. Work, goals, routine. I had loved her through autopilot. She felt alone not because I didn't love her, but because I wasn't there anymore in the ways that mattered. I'd been living with her like a roommate I liked, not a woman whose fear, stress, dreams, and emotional world still needed tending. That didn't excuse what she did, but it made the landscape painfully clearer. Infidelity is rarely the beginning. It's the symptom of the fire already burning under the floorboards. One night we sat on the balcony, drinking tea instead of wine, staring at the city lights. Emily finally said, "I want you to ask me something." "What?" "The question I'm terrified of." I looked at her. "Are you still in love with him?" She closed her eyes and answered with brutal honesty. I was in love with what he reflected back at me, but now, I miss who I thought I was with him, not him. Do you still think about him? Less every day, and every time I do, I remind myself of who I hurt to feel seen. We sat quietly for a while. Then she asked me, "Do you still want this, us?" I didn't answer immediately. Because wanting someone and believing the relationship can survive are not the same thing. Finally, I said, "I want us, but I don't want the version of us that sleepwalked into this." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Neither do I." 2 months passed. The air between us changed, slowly, subtly, unevenly. Some days were good enough that the future didn't scare either of us. Some days were hard enough that we nearly broke again. Trust didn't return with grand gestures. It came back in small acts. Her leaving her phone on the table, screen up. Me reaching for her hand first. Her asking questions instead of assuming. Me listening without planning a rebuttal. Her choosing transparency. Me choosing vulnerability. Rebuilding wasn't romantic. It was work. Discipline. Humility on both sides. But slowly, we began to feel like partners again, not opponents navigating a truce. Then one evening, everything came to a quiet crossroads. We were in bed facing each other. No tension, no argument, just calm. Emily rested her hand over mine and whispered, "Do you forgive me?" My throat tightened. Forgiveness wasn't an event. It was a road. Sometimes I walked it well. Sometimes I limped. Sometimes I stood still. But I was on the road. I met her eyes and answered honestly. I forgive you a little more every day, and one day I think I will completely. She nodded, tears sliding quietly down her temples. Thank you, she whispered. I shook my head softly. No, we thank each other when we get to the other side of this. She smiled, fragile and real. I'm not going anywhere. For the first time, I said, I believe you. Where we ended up wasn't a happy ending montage. We didn't become the perfect couple. We didn't erase the past. We didn't pretend the fracture never happened. Instead, we did the most adult thing two people can do. We stayed. Not out of fear. Not out of dependency. But out of commitment. We decided that our love was worth the discomfort of rebuilding brick by brick, truth by truth, day by day. Because the story wasn't. She cheated and he left. Or she cheated and he forgave instantly. The real story was. She broke something. He shattered too. And then together, they chose to rebuild instead of burn what remained. Not everyone gets that ending. Not everyone should. But we did. Not because we were perfect, but because we finally understood that love isn't proven when everything is easy. It's proven when two flawed people face the wreckage. And both say, I'm still here.